recent years, podcasts and other news media have begun to reevaluate and deconstruct the satanic panic, a bout of mass hysteria that afflicted the United States for over a decade. But what if it wasn't just hysteria? What if some of it was true? Tonight, we delve into the Franklin cover-up, a tale of embezzlement, government conspiracies, and child exploitation. It's the case of the devil and the banker, and I'm your host, Drew, and you're listening to The Ritual Rewind. Ten-year-old Alisha Owen was locked in a basement room inside of an office building in downtown Omaha. It was dark. There were no windows, but she knew she wasn't alone. There were others her age there too. At around midnight, men in black robes barged through the door and dragged out one of the girls. For hours, Alisha heard the cracks of a whip and the cries of the young girl. For Alisha Owen, this was just the beginning of her nightmare. The baritone voice you hear is of Larry King Jr. He's a large, well-dressed, 40-year-old black man with Coke bottle glasses. And here, he's singing at the 1984 Republican National Convention in Dallas, Texas. Larry King was considered a rising star in the Republican Party. He boasted close relationships with numerous high-profile members of the establishment, including Justice Clarence Thomas and the first President Bush. But behind his charismatic personality, King held a dark, unsettling secret. He was the head of a nationwide child sex ring centered in Omaha, Nebraska, that reached to the highest echelons of power in Washington, D.C. And by the end of an investigation into a failing savings and loan bank, there would be accusations of satanic rituals, child sacrifice, and over 15 people would be dead under suspicious circumstances, and several others in prison. Larry King Jr. was born in 1944 in Nebraska, and in 1965 he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and was stationed in Thailand during the Vietnam War. There he served as an information specialist and handled top-secret military communications for the clandestine services. And upon his return, King became the manager of the Franklin Credit Union. The Franklin Credit Union was meant to serve low-income neighborhoods of color in Omaha, and under King's management the bank received millions of dollars in welfare and Social Security checks. And thanks to his work with the credit union, King's prominence in the community began to rise. He served on the boards of the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, and other numerous youth organizations. As his standing in the community grew, so did his spending. King purchased homes in both Omaha and Washington, D.C. He dressed in tailored suits and traveled extensively in private jets. But soon, all this success would come crashing down. On November 4th, 1988, the FBI, the IRS, and the National Credit Union Administration raided the Franklin Credit Union. Nearly $40 million had gone missing from their accounts, looted by Larry King and his associates. And as the shockwaves rippled across the Omaha business community, questions began to arise. Federally insured credit unions are required to have yearly audits, but the Franklin Credit Union hadn't had one in 4 years. And it seems that whenever auditors would attempt to do one, Larry King would call friends in D.C. and the auditors would be quickly reassigned. As the community focused on the embezzlement of funds, something more sinister simmered beneath the surface. It was rumored that along with the financial and accounting statements confiscated from the credit union, there were also numerous boxes filled with pornographic material. 2 weeks after the bank's collapse, at the behest of Nebraska State Senator Loren Schmidt, the state legislature passed a resolution to form a committee to investigate the credit union. Soon after, Senator Schmidt received an ominous phone call.
I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller did not identify himself, but he said, "Loren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union." And I asked who I was speaking to, and they said, "That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party." and we're both good Republicans.
The Franklin Committee hired their first investigator in February 1989, former police detective Jerry Lowe. Detective Lowe uncovered material that suggested Larry King was running guns and laundering money into Nicaragua for the CIA, in what would become known as the Iran-Contra affair. It's quite possible that Larry King was one of the many operators of savings and loans that the CIA used to help finance their covert operations. They would borrow money and invest it in hot money schemes. The profits would be placed into a slush fund, and the money used in the initial investment would then be returned to the bank. But the money didn't always make it back, and this would lead to the savings and loans crisis in the early 90s. Amongst the financial improprieties that Lowe's investigation uncovered, they also found a long-buried report of child abuse. In a memo sent to the committee, Lowe wrote, "I have found what appears to be documented cases of child sexual abuse dating back several years with no enforcement action taken by the appropriate agencies. The information that became public in 1988 relative to Larry King's family connection with one of the principals is cause for further concern." The principals of concern were Jarrett and Barbara Webb, and the victim was Euless Washington. In June 1985, 3 years before the raid on the Franklin Credit Union, Nebraska's Child Services were sent to investigate reports of abuse amongst several foster children living with Jarrett and Barbara Webb. The most prominent accuser amongst them was Euless Washington. Euless was 8 years old when she went to live with the Webbs in 1977. While in their custody, she suffered both physical and sexual abuse. Both Nebraska's Department of Social Services and the state police found the accusations to be credible and relocated Euless to another foster home. But further investigation into the Webbs was abruptly halted because of their relationship with Larry King. Jarrett Webb served on the Franklin Credit Union board, and his wife, Barbara, was Larry King's cousin. And while Euless's initial accusations were serious enough on their own, they paled in comparison to what she would reveal to her new foster parent, Kathleen Sorensen. According to Euless, King would often call the Webbs on a moment's notice and request the kids be made ready for him. He would then arrive at their home in his limo and take the kids to one of his parties at an apartment building in downtown Omaha, known as the Twin Towers. It was at these parties that children would be made to parade around the room to an audience of 10 to 15 adult men and then be auctioned off to the highest bidder.
I was dressed in a negligee. There were a lot of young boys performing certain things sexually with other men, and men ejaculated or masturbated in front of me.
Euless further claimed that she and the other children were trafficked across state lines aboard King's private jets to both New York and Chicago, where she would participate in similar sex parties there. Kathleen Sorensen reported these claims to social services and the Nebraska State Police. They, in turn, referred the case to the Washington County Attorney, Pat Tripp, who ultimately rejected it, calling Euless nothing but a liar. Demoralized, Sorensen confided in her friend Kirsten Hallberg. Hallberg was a resident advisor at UTA Halley, a psychiatric facility for troubled young women in Omaha, and she had a patient with a similar story to Euless's. In June 1986, almost a year to the day after Euless Washington first made her accusations against the Webbs, Shawntee Moore was admitted to UTA Halley. She was 12 at the time. Kirsten Hallberg was assigned to evaluate her on her initial intake and noticed that Shawntee was extremely distressed. As Hallberg pressed her for information, Shawntee confessed to being involved in a prostitution ring for the last 3 years. She had been lured into it by a local photographer named Rusty Nelson, an overweight, 40-year-old black man. Shawntee soon found herself attending King's parties at the Twin Towers, where she was assaulted by prominent individuals in the Omaha business community, including doctors, lawyers, and more shockingly, an administrator and principal for the local school district. After about 6 months, Moore was taken to her first, of which she called, power meetings. One particular power meeting was held in an abandoned shack. There were lit candles and the men dressed in black robes adorned with inverted crosses. Shawntee claimed to be held in a dark room for hours, and she listened as another girl was tortured. Horrified by what she had heard, Hallberg wanted to go to the police, but her supervisor rebuffed her, telling her that she would be breaking patient confidentiality if she did so. Undeterred, Hallberg went to Carol Stitt, the director of Nebraska's Foster Care Review Board, and told her what she had learned. And in July 1988, 4 months prior to the raid on the Franklin Credit Union, Governor Orr directed Stitt to take the necessary measures to investigate the allegations. It was in short order that Stitt received a threatening phone call. This is Carol Stitt's.
I did receive a phone call at home that said, "If you speak, you won't live to regret it."
The case fell on the desk of Omaha Police Detective Earl Carmian, Carmian had been a member of the OPD since 1977 and had recently been involved in the investigation of local photographer Rusty Nelson. Rusty had approached a mother and daughter on the street. He wanted the daughter to model for a fashion magazine. Initially excited about the idea, the mother's enthusiasm quickly faded when she arrived at Nelson's studio at the Twin Towers. Numerous times during the session, Nelson pressured the mother to allow her daughter to pose in lingerie. The mother refused, and uneasy with Nelson's continued requests, she removed her daughter from the situation and reported him to the police. Officer Carmian visited Shawntee at UTA Haley and spoke with her at length. He came away believing her allegations to be truthful. As the investigation deepened, Carmian was approached by Police Chief Robert Wadman. Wadman demanded to know if Carmian was investigating Larry King. When Carmian confirmed that he was, Wadman ordered him to back off, but Carmian refused. 2 weeks later, Wadman pulled him off the case and declared him mentally unfit. Wadman released a statement saying that the accusations against King had been investigated and were found to be without merit. Franklin Committee investigator Jerry Lowe interviewed Euless Washington, Shawntee Moore, and Officer Carmian and came to a similar conclusion as Wadman. This assessment infuriated the head of the committee, Lawrence Schmidt, and he called the investigation slipshod, superficial, and incompetent. This is Carol Stitt again, from The Conspiracy of Silence.
And the information presented to the Foster Care Review Board, either via the telephone reports, the personal reports, or the reports we reviewed, Larry King's name was consistently present as someone that the youth were making allegations against. I would say we handed over at least a foot-high amount of material, and nothing happened.
Lowe resigned immediately. This paved the way for the selection of a new investigator, Gary Caradori. Gary Caradori was a husband and a father of two. Prior to starting his own investigative firm, Caradori had an extensive career in law enforcement. He was heralded in newspapers as one of the best investigators in the country. During this investigation, Caradori would be subjected to tapped phones, intimidation, a home invasion, and harassment of victims and witnesses. Caradori began his investigation on August 21, 1989. He initially started with the reports generated by Lowe and the National Credit Union Association, or the NCUA. The NCUA had set up a reconstruction office in Omaha to track the missing $40 million. In those files, Caradori discovered thousands of checks, invoices, and receipts from various air charter services. The flight receipts revealed that King chartered Learjets on a nearly weekly basis to Washington, D.C. Caradori was able to find the flights chartered by King, and with it, lists of names of underage children. As he was copying the itineraries, the company's CEO barged in and demanded that he leave without the names. By the time that he had subpoenaed the documents, the itineraries had been altered and the list of names were gone. But rather than deter Caradori, it only fueled his desire to continue. The first person Caradori spoke with was Alisha Owen.
It was either August 16th or August 23rd of 1984. I remember that because it was the week before school started. I met some guys that were from Boys Town, had said that there was going to be a party that Friday and would I like to come. And I said, well, sure. I went to a party, and it was at that party that I met Larry King.
Alisha first met Larry King when she was 14 years old. At her first party, she witnessed the teens playing what she called the 501 game, named after the Levi brand of jeans. It was a sexualized game in which the teens would attempt to unbutton each other's clothing with their teeth or toes. She watched as sexual acts were performed out in the open between the adult men and teens. And it was at this party that she would meet Police Chief Robert Wadman.
He sat me down on his lap. He started touching me through my clothes. That was the night that he taught me how to get a pen.
Alisha would be pimped out to Wadman countless times over the next year, which would result in a pregnancy, the paternity of which Wadman would deny. Alisha took her first chartered flight with Larry King in 1984. It would be the first of many. On these trips, she would witness the ritual abuse and murder of several children.
I knew that we ended up in California in a smaller airport. It was not LAX. Larry King and this boy get out. Danny and I both stay at this hotel. Two guys came to the hotel room, and one of them had Danny and the other one had me. They were both white, and they were both businessmen, and they knew each other. He wanted to have anal sex. He wanted to hurt me. He took out a knife, and he said he was going to cut my nipples off, my breasts off.
And who was the boy that stayed in the hotel?
Danny King.
Danny King. And how old roughly?
He's 13.
13.
After years of being subjected to ritual abuse, Alisha Owen was placed into solitary confinement at UTA Haley. And as Caradori's investigation deepened, Alisha would feel the full weight of the U.S. government bearing down on her.
When did you meet Alisha Owens?
I met Alisha Owen in about, let's say February, March, April.
Okay. And during that time, did you two become pretty good friends?
Yeah, real good friends.
The voice you hear is Troy Boner from a taped interview with Gary Caradori. Troy Boner first met Larry King in July 1984. Here he is describing the first time he was introduced to Larry King.
Larry King just walked up to you?
Just walked up, grabs me, and, gets close to me, and he's like, I heard good things about you, or something like that,
King moved Troy into the local travel lodge, where over the course of the next 3 weeks, King would visit Troy for sex. And like others before him, Troy accompanied Kings on flights all across the country.
So Danny and Alicia were taken by an older white man at the airport in Pasadena and taken to a house. Is that correct?
Yes.
And who arranged that?
It was Larry King's arrangement.
Alicia and Danny are someplace else that you don't know?
Yeah.
For 2 days at least?
We picked them up at the same house we got them off there. Alicia just looked like shit. I mean, she was literally, you could tell she'd been fucked everywhere, but, in her eye probably. I mean, she just looked like shit. She smelled bad. I don't know if they kept her locked up in a room. She didn't talk to me. She did talk to me for a long time after that. A long time.
In 1989, the Franklin Credit Union scandal burst into the headlines.
That was John Walsh from his show, America's Most Wanted.
Paul Bonacci was one of the witnesses who made shocking allegations of child sexual abuse by some of Omaha's most influential citizens.
They force you to do things, and they photograph it, they film it. The whole purpose for that is to either blackmail you into staying with them or split your mind up so that you don't even remember who you are.
Paul Bonacci was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. According to the psychiatrist that treated him, these personalities were originally created at moments of psychological terror when he was a defenseless child. But if you were to ask Paul, he would say that they were created in a CIA program called Project Monarch.
I was created by a government program.
Which government program?
Monarch.
And what is Monarch?
Monarch is an operation that was created by the United States government to create spies for other countries. They use children for the purpose that they are easily integrated into multiple personalities because they can dissociate.
Regardless of how the personalities came to be, Paul was recruited into Larry King's exploitation ring at the age of 11. He claimed to have participated in satanic ritual abuse and child exploitation. Paul traveled with Larry King to Sacramento, where they picked up a boy named Nicholas, who was being held captive in a cage. They drove 2 hours north into the Redwoods to a place called the Bohemian Grove.
I'm malevolence which would pursue us here has lost its power under these friendly trees.
Those chants you hear are from a secretly recorded video that captured a ritual ceremony performed at the Bohemian Grove.
We shall read the sign. Midsummer sets us free. You shall burn me once again.
The Bohemian Grove is a 3,000-acre private compound hidden within the redwood forest of Northern California. It has hosted countless U.S. presidents, government officials, and businessmen. Its most famous ceremony is called the Cremation of Care.
Ye fools and priests, I spit upon your fire.
It is during this ceremony that dark hooded figures will place a childlike effigy on an altar and burn it. Paul Bonacci attended one of these ceremonies. But instead of sacrificing a wooden effigy, it was Nicholas.
They opened the cage, they grabbed Nicholas, and they drugged him over in the woods and stuff. I heard a couple of shots.
What did they do with the body?
I don't know.
Did they make you beat him?
They tried to.
They filled a golden chalice with Nicholas's blood and passed it amongst themselves, chanting, "Satan is Lord, Lucifer our King. The realm of darkness, come now and empower us, your slave." As an aside to this story, a man who claimed to be author Hunter S. Thompson filmed the ritual murder. Though there is no proof of this, Hunter S. Thompson wrote about adrenochrome in his book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. The idea of adrenochrome, a hormone that supposedly can only be siphoned from the adrenaline glands of a living human, happens to be a fundamental belief of QAnon.
And if Washington doesn't have enough to talk about these days, the Washington Times reported today that unidentified White House aides in the Carter, Reagan, and Bush administrations now are being investigated for using the services of a call boy ring. The paper reports that 2 of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
Around the same time that the Franklin sex scandal was exploding in Nebraska, another one was erupting 1,200 miles away in the nation's capital. Washington Times reporter Paul Rodriguez was investigating a local call boy service that had recently been busted by the D.C. Metro Police.
claimed to have clients that ran from the White House to the Capitol Hill to the State House to the churches.
In doing so, he discovered a link between the head of the escort service, Craig Spence, the CIA, and Larry King. Like Larry King, Spence threw lavish parties at his home in D.C., where the political elite could live out their sexual fantasies. Everything was on the table. But unbeknownst to those elite politicians, Spence had outfitted his home with video and audio surveillance to capture every seedy action.
The prosecutors knew all this stuff. There was approximately 20,000 pieces of 20,000 documents that they had. They sealed the entire record by court order, and we've attempted on several occasions to unseal that, and we've been told it will be a cold day in hell before those records ever get unsealed. And it makes me wonder what's in those records.
On March 19, 1990, a grand jury was convened, and almost immediately the case fell apart, with the prosecutors seemingly trying to make a case against the accusers instead of the perpetrators. And though Alisha Owen stuck to her story, Troy Boner and Paul Bonacci altered theirs, claiming that while some of the abuse happened, most of their stories were fabricated. Senator Schmidt and investigator Cara Dorey believed that Troy and Paul folded under intense pressure from the FBI. Cara Dorey told Senator Schmidt that he had some leads to follow up on in hopes of salvaging the case. He had recently been contacted by the photographer Rusty Nelson, who claimed to have incriminating photos of Larry King and others. And Cara Dorey flew to Chicago to meet with him. And on the night of July 11, 1990, Cara Dorey was piloting his small plane back home from Chicago when it suddenly exploded over a cornfield in Lincoln, Nebraska.
National Transportation Safety Board investigators say wreckage from the crash is apparently strewn over a 3/4 to 1 mile long stretch in this field.
The fact that the wreckage is scattered over a large area certainly demonstrates that it did break up in flight. The exact mechanism of breakup yet is still unknown.
Early the next day, the FBI raided Cara Dorey's office, confiscating all the files in relation to the Franklin investigation. Cara Dorey's briefcase with all the photos was never found. 12 days after the death of Gary Cara Dorey, the Douglas County grand jury wrapped up, issuing a report that called the abuse stories a carefully crafted hoax. Larry King was cleared of all child abuse. The grand jury found no credible evidence of child sexual abuse, interstate transportation of minors, or participation in a pornography ring by King or other Franklin officials. Larry King was never called to testify. He was tucked away in a psychiatric facility in Springfield, Missouri. The institution's chief psychiatrist diagnosed King with probable delusional paranoid disorder of the grandiose type. King would eventually be indicted in federal court on 40 counts of financial wrongdoing. He accepted a plea bargain and served a 15-year prison sentence for embezzlement, conspiracy, and making false financial records. He was released in April 2001. I will leave you with some final words from John DeCamp, the lawyer who investigated these claims.
It's a web of intrigue that starts in our Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House. Involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America.
In researching this episode, we relied heavily on the books The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal by Nick Bryant, and The Franklin Cover-Up by John DeCamp, as well as the documentary Conspiracy of Silence from the BBC. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Ritual Rewind. As always, please leave a review, tell a friend, and subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. You can interact with us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And since we are a podcast about when cassette culture met cult culture, stay tuned after this short break for this week's film pairing. For this week's movie pairing, we recommend Regression, starring Ethan Hawke and Emma Watson. An opening title card claims that this film is inspired by true events and takes place in Hoyer, Minnesota in 1990, at the tail end of the Satanic Panic. As the film opens, a father, John Gray, is arrested after his daughter Angela, played by Emma Watson, claims that he had sexually abused her. Her father, emotionally wrecked from the accusations, says he has no memory of the acts. The case falls on the desk of Detective Bruce Kenner, played by Ethan Hawke, who seeks the help of a hypnotherapist to recover the father's memories. Detective Kenner and the hypnotherapist begin to experiment with regressive hypnosis, a process that was all the rage in the 1980s and was central to a memoir, Michelle Remembers, which many believe was the starting point of the satanic panic. In the book, Michelle remembers a young woman is placed under hypnotherapy and recalls being ritually abused by a satanic cult. In the film, the father, under hypnosis, names not himself as the abuser, but a local police officer, George Nesbitt, who is quickly arrested by Detective Kenner, though the officer proclaims his innocence. But this isn't the end of the investigation, because the daughter, Angela, claims that there's a satanic cabal hidden in this small town, and that they've been terrorizing the children for years. And much like the Franklin Credit Union, there are accusations of child sacrifice and cannibalism. And as Detective Kenner gets sucked into the investigation, paranoia takes over. It's an enjoyable, solid mystery with a brooding atmosphere that I would rate 3.5 VHS tapes out of 5. But be warned, the rhythmic tick of a metronome is used in the initial hypnotism and is present throughout the film, which might be risky if you're prone to those sorts of things. Thank you for listening, and good night.